This event is in partnership with the Washington Literacy Center, and I have a representative that will share a few words.
Thank you. My name is Evita Smedley, and I'm from Washington Literacy Center. I really appreciate this opportunity to raise awareness about adult literacy, very briefly, by the way, in Washington, D.C. Did you know that 1 in 4 adults struggles with basic reading? 1 in 3 adults cannot do basic math, and low literacy skills are a barrier to just about everything. Getting a job, staying out of poverty, getting an education. DC is often described as a tale of two cities, one with the highest levels of education in the nation and the highest number of millionaires per capita. The other is where 17.4% of people live in poverty, and this is due to their limited job prospects and their earning potential due to low literacy. For over 60 years, we have provided essential reading and math for adults with the fewest resources. Almost 95% of our students and our recipients live in poverty. Our work wouldn't be possible without the generosity of our neighbors and our friends. If you are interested in what we do, want to learn more about us, please visit us at www.washlit.org. Thank you so much for your attention.
So now, without further ado, tonight I'm very excited to welcome Dr. Jenn M. Jackson, celebrating the release of Black Women Taught Us: An Intimate History of Black Feminism. Dr. Jenn M. Jackson has been known to bring historical acuity to some of the most controversial topics in America today. Now, in their first book, Jackson applies their critical analysis to the questions that have long energized their work. Why has Black women's freedom fighting been so overlooked throughout history, and what has our society lost because of our refusal to engage with our forestrugglers' lessons? A love letter to those who have been minimized and forgotten, this collection repositions Black women's intellectual and political work at the center of today's liberation movements. For a new generation of movement organizers and co-strugglers, Black Women Taught Us serves as a reminder that Black women were the first ones to teach us how to fight racism, how to name that fight, and how to imagine a more just world for everyone. Dr. Jenn M. Jackson is an award-winning professor of political science at Syracuse University and a columnist for Teen Vogue, where they write the popular Speak On It column that explores how today's social and political life is influenced by generations of racial and gender disorder. A queer, gender flux, androgynous Black woman, Jackson's primary research is in the Black politics with a focus on Black feminism, racial trauma and threat, gender and sexuality, and social movements. Black Women Taught Us is their first book. Please join me in welcoming to Politics and Prose, Dr. Jenn M. Jackson.
All right. Can y'all hear me okay? I see family in the room. Thank y'all for being here. So I want to start by saying that at every single one of these so far, I have had an opening and a grounding. I'm 6'4", so I feel so small right now. Can you see me okay sitting down here? Okay. So at every single one of these, I have had an opening and a grounding, meaning I've called in a practitioner, someone who studies and works in some type of spiritual or religious faith to get us centered and ready for what's going to happen. So while I haven't done that for this one, I do want us to spend some time just calling in our ancestors, deep breathing and getting settled. I take this book very seriously, and I'll tell you why in just a moment, but first, let's just get grounded in this space. Just take a few deep breaths. If you can close your eyes, if you feel comfortable closing your eyes, please do so. Please get your feet planted on the ground. Any of you who practice yoga or any type of somatics, you may want to put your hands down on your knees or up to receive energy. But for now, the focus is just on your breath, right? I'm a high anxiety person, and I'm always nervous when I'm around strangers, so y'all just welcome me in, right? Deep breaths. And release through our nose. Breathe in deeply, in through your nose, and out again. Let's do one more. And out through your nose. And what I want us to do is call into the space some of the Black women who have taught us in our lives. And it's important that we call in those, not just those who we remember from school, whose pictures have been posted on walls when we were children, but also those women who were in our lives, whose names others may not know or remember. So for the next couple of seconds, please just call in those names, whether you say it out loud or you say it to yourself. I want to call in my grandmother, Clara Logan, who I'll talk to y'all about later on. My grandmother, Lucille Sanders. I'm going to call in my aunt, Lori Mann. And Bell Hooks. And Toni Morrison. Please call in your ancestors, call in those church mothers, call in those women who had candy in their pocket, those aunties. Call them into the space. Breathe deeply and release it through your nose. We're going to do that 2 more times. Breathe in and release it through your nose. 1 more time. Breathe in deeply and release it through your nose. So this is important to me for a number of reasons, but I'm going to start with a reading that may give you some indication as to why. And I come to this conversation with you all as a deeply political and politicized person. As you can see, I'm wearing my keffiyeh. I believe in a free Palestine, a free Congo, a free Sudan, a free Ethiopia, a free Hawaii, a free people of color all over the world. And I write this book from that place. I also write this book from a place of a scared little Black girl who grew up in Oakland, California in the 90s. And so I want to start with chapter 7 about Toni Morrison that I think gives you some picture of what that little girl's life was like. Chapter 7. Toni Morrison taught me that Black women are powerful. It is the language that drinks blood, laps vulnerabilities, tucks its fascist boots under crinolines of respectability and patriotism as it moves relentlessly toward the bottom line and the bottomed out mind. Sexist language, racist language, theistic language, all are typical of the policing languages of mastery and do not permit new knowledge or encourage the mutual exchange of ideas. Toni Morrison said that because she had bars. This is me, okay? Sula, Denver, and Picola met me at the foot of my bed each night. Smushing down the mattress on my daybed, the weight of their stories put a dent in my resting place. They were little Black girls like me, wayward, confused, misunderstood, and determined. When the sun went down and my mother tucked me in, they would pile into my twin-sized bed, telling me stories about their complicated lives. They'd whisper in sweet tones so they wouldn't wake my mother just a few steps down the hall. We'd giggle together, as little girls do, laughing through the painful parts. I'd curl up under the soft beige Sherpa blanket with a satin trim, using the light from my bedroom window to accentuate their faces. Sometimes I would grab a flashlight to track along with their words. My peach-colored walls glowed warm in the dim light, reminding us girls that we were in a safe and gentle place together. Sula, a beautifully brown Black girl with thick lips and a proud grin, sat incredulously with her legs crossed. She was tense, shoulders taut, and toes at a point. Her wool cloche hat resting snugly against her pin curls, Sula wrapped her lips around every word like they were made of pure sugar. She talked with her hands, as big-spirited girls do. It was Sula who told me that Black girls are not always cared for. This is especially so for Black girls who grow up and break the rules, the ones who go against what is expected of them, those who rebel proudly. She tells me about the mistakes she's made, but says she is still proud of herself because at least she survived. I'd rather be shunned for who I am than accepted for who I'm not, she whispered to me. Sula had been labeled by her community, ostracized, and excommunicated, becoming a scapegoat for the sins of the bottom, a place ravaged by racism and white supremacy. She was a convenient enemy. She knew that, and I could relate. I understood the feeling of being on the outside, even when standing inside of a container made for us. I knew how it felt to feel alone, even when people who looked like me were everywhere around me. Sula was sad, but it was in the background. I saw it in her eyes, but only because I had the same gaze. We both buried our sadness so that the world couldn't see it. We kept our true selves hidden away from people who might harm us, acting out on the surface what everyone thought we should be, good or bad. That was how we made it through. Denver, with her curly hair, soft presence, and honey-complected skin, reminded me of my fairer-skinned cousins. She never raised her voice, and her eyes always looked hopeful. It was Denver who told me about the ghosts in the walls, the ones who remind you that you can do more than you ever thought you could, the ghosts who remind you and your kin that sometimes the world is a very ugly place that makes your own people do ugly things. And even when we do ugly things, we are trying to capture our power, trying to reclaim ourselves from a world that doesn't want us or only wants pieces of us. Her mother, Setha, showed her that mama doesn't always see it, she'd say. Sometimes the grief is too much. The despair is too heavy, and mama gets overwhelmed. I understood that experience too. It was mine as well. Denver's mom was haunted by the baby she had killed to save her from captivity. My mother was just haunted by being a Black single mother in a country that wanted people like her, and by extension, people like me, to disappear. Mom would languish, sometimes in bouts of anger and sadness, as she tried to hold on to her sanity in a world that was driving her crazy. She'd cry at the foot of her bed, just as quietly as I whispered to Denver. Our house was the place where all of our survival techniques were honed and crafted. For Denver, it was Sweet Home, the place her mother was trying to turn into warmth and gentleness. For me, it was a small 2-bedroom home in the center of Oakland where I spent most of my time either alone or sitting close by my mother's feet. I wanted nothing more than to be near her, even with all her ghosts, and the ghosts in our walls, the ones left by my dad and by her husbands. The ghosts that plagued my mother and my brother before he left, the ghosts that kept me up all night, afraid that if I slept, they would badger me in my dreams. Sometimes they did. Denver beat the ghosts when she developed a community with her elders and foremothers. She beat the ghosts when she made connections with the women who loved her. There was a triumph and a joy to Denver that made me feel like I could survive. She helped me to see myself in the future. Picola, with her deep, dark skin, coarse hair, and deeply sad eyes, sat with her head slightly bowed, her braided pigtails sticking out on either side of her round face. It was Picola who told me about the pain of wanting something, praying for it, begging and asking God for it, only to never have it arrive. Picola wanted blue eyes so that she could possess the beauty of the white world. Those piercing blue eyes that stared through her and never gave her solace. Instead, she got salt in her wounds, sexual abuse, ridicule from her community, and shame and guilt for being a girl in a place where girls weren't safe. Picola and I would compare notes, swap prayers, and mull over our unrequited love. I'd stay up begging God for lighter skin, longer hair, and a curl pattern that bounced and flowed with the wind rather than standing straight up on my head. I sometimes asked God to make me smaller so that the boys wouldn't punch me like I was a boy too. I asked for a softer voice, straighter feet, and femininity. I prayed and prayed and prayed, closing my eyes so tightly that sometimes they would water. The water turned to salty tears as I pressed my face into my pillow, knowing I would still be dark, nappy-headed, and ugly when I woke up. I sometimes cried myself to sleep. Picola would pat me on my back, encouraging me. She didn't have any answers or solutions. She just understood me. She understood the pain of being in a body that the world found ugly and how that ugliness seeped in everywhere, even into the tender and soft places, the sacred places. She couldn't tell me how to keep the pain or the ugly out. Picola only knew how to be there for me through it. That was her power. Morrison's characters, these little girls, rose up to meet me in a time in my life when I had not yet formed the words, beliefs, and ideas about who I was and what I wanted to do with myself. Us 4 little girls would imagine together at the foot of my bed, wrapped up tightly in the covers, peering into the pages of the perfection Morrison had gifted us with. There was a power on these pages that I couldn't find anywhere else. The power to write me into the world, even when that world wanted to write me out of it. There was a sense of inner knowing, an outer recognition of being Black and of living Blackly, without regard for the white world and what they would doubt and how they would co-opt, water down, and erase our stories. Morrison created a new world with just words alone. She was a god, and she used her power to create and recreate us over and over again. Okay. Thank y'all for the clapping. Okay, so that's the beginning of chapter 7. It's the chapter where I am really thinking about the impact that Toni Morrison has had on my life and on me as a writer. But I hope that also what you're getting from me sharing that excerpt, right, is that this book is absolutely about the 11 women, the 11 folks that I include here, but it's also about me. It's also about Black women. It's also about the ways that we move in and through our bodies and in community. So this is where I start to talk about some of the questions I've gotten on the book tour that I think were some of the most kind of poignant and prolific questions that really help to draw out what this book is doing. The first is, I get the question a lot, why did I start the book talking about my mother? And when you open the book, that's the first thing you see. I start talking about being in my home in Oakland, California, around 8 years old, and my mother had a singing group named Majesty. It was a gospel singing group. And she's still in this singing group. She's been in that group for 4 decades. And they would practice in my living room because we had the piano. I'm sure there were other reasons because we had to clean his house too, but we had the piano. And so every Wednesday, my aunts, right, air quotes, aunts would come. And I say air quotes because that was not related to these women by blood. These were what we call fictive kin, right? That's Auntie Donna because she was here when I was born and she's older, so therefore she's not a cousin, she's an auntie, right? Auntie Barbara, same thing, right? So I have, as the book opens, you hear me talking about my Auntie Barbara and my Auntie Donna Faye. And my Auntie Donna Faye was a taller woman. She had a full mustache and beard, and she had long, curvy nails and an asymmetrical bob, like she was it. And my Auntie Donna Faye always told me, you know, when you go outside, make sure you have earrings on and lipstick. That was her thing. And to this day, right, any bag you see of mine, there's a bag of earrings and lipsticks. And it's exhausting. My Auntie Barbara, I open the book and I talk about, she's the one that taught me how to make chicken properly. It seems seemingly innocuous, right? But opening the book, I talk about her because this was the first time someone told me how to do this, right? I was making chicken and it was raw in the middle because I was 8. It was well seasoned, she said. But she told me, she said, you know, in the future, you poke that chicken and you see what color comes out. If it comes out clear, it's done. If it comes out red, it's not. And so to this day, here I am now turning 40 in a few weeks, and I still hear my Auntie Barbara telling me how to make chicken, right? And I opened the book talking about my mother because I watched my mother, right? She was kind of the first lesson I ever had in what it meant to be a woman, right? And I want to make sure I couch this. Y'all gonna get the most intimate of all these talks. So I have to awfully give y'all the background information. This is the last one of the summer. This is it, right? This is it. I'm retiring after this, okay? Shout out to Black August. The book came out January 23rd. I have been on the road all year, and this is actually the last one. So this is kind of meaningful to me. And this is the only one I've done by myself. So y'all get all the tea. So I want to give y'all the background also that my mother was a single mother and I was a queer gendered child, right? And so witnessing my mother kind of go through what I now see as drag, right? Putting on the makeup, the perfume, the outfits. You know, she had clothes in every closet. I thought it was so strange, right? Because here I am, you know, rebuffing that culture, not wanting to dress that way, hating makeup, right? Hating all those things that she taught me were associated with my gender. And I didn't understand why she embraced them so much. But the book is really an exploration of my working through, you know, gender, sexuality, disability, and Blackness, and being poor as a child, and kind of what this has all meant, right, for my feminism. But also, it's an examination of my mother, right? Y'all getting all the tea. I'm about to tell you something, right? So here's something that's interesting, right? There are people in this room who have been to 2, 3, and 4 of my book talks on this tour. There are people who have come everywhere I've been all over the country. And my mother has not been to a single book talk. And yet she still is the person that this book is dedicated to, right? This is what this book is about. It's that complexity, right, of me holding that deep love and admiration for my mother, so much so that the book opens up and talks about her, that this love letter I've written is a love letter to her, but she still, to this day, does not show up. You see what I'm saying? And so I want this answer to this question, why you start off with your mother. I think I'm going to actually tell the full truth now. Because over the course of the book tour, I've been saying, oh, it's because she was the first example I had of Black feminism, which I think is true, right? But I also think that there's a part of this story, as I've now read it a few times on the book tour, and I've grown over these last 7 months, that I think some of this was me having to grieve, right? There's some grief in this book, right? In the ways that we have to grieve these relationships with so many Black women that didn't pan out the way we thought they would. They didn't turn out the way we thought they should. And it may have been a mother, or an aunt, or a sister, or a daughter, some type of kin, right? A lover, a friend. But it's also some of these heroes, right? These women I'm talking about, the Bell Hookses, the Ida B. Wellses, the Zora Neale Hurstons, in somebody's story, they're a villain, right? In somebody's story, there's still people who mad at Bell Hooks for saying that Beyonce was a terrorist. We're not going to debate that today. Don't bring that up in the question and answer. I don't want to do that, right? But to say that Black women, the point here is that Black women hold so much complexity, right? And that Black women get to be complex. They get to contain multitudes, right? But still not be thrown away, right? Even though I'm using my mother as an example, my mother didn't do at all times what I thought she should do. Didn't show up in the ways that I think may have been her best ways. She still deserves a love letter from her child. Because it's because of her that I'm here today, right? So that's the full answer to that question. Another question I think that's been really important to me, George Johnson asked me this in Los Angeles. They asked me if the genre of the book is so flexible because my gender moves and shifts so much. I know, that's the face I made when George asked me. I was like, oh, you know what? And I at the time I said, wow, that's an interesting question, because I have only come into understanding myself as a genderqueer, gender flux person in the past 5 years. But as you read the book, right, you can see that there is a child, a young person, trying to find themselves, constantly trying to locate themselves amongst so many rules and narratives and norms that just don't fit. And the book ends up being not just a love letter, right? Not just a love letter to Black women, but also a love letter to the past versions of myself, right? And me having to acknowledge that there were so many points where I had no idea what was going on. I didn't know if I was gonna make it to 21 or 25 or 30, right? And so each kind of iteration of me was an effort. It was, I'm trying to get where I believe I'm supposed to be. It was an effort to kind of come into that self-knowing that I feel like I didn't actually get to until this year, until this book came out, right? So to answer George's question, I guess I got to text George now. The answer was yes then, but I think now I understand more why that's so, right? Because in the grieving and the mourning that I had to do with respect to my mother, I also had to do the grieving and the mourning and the forgiving of myself for not honoring and regarding the past versions of myself that it took to get here today. Another question, Mecca Jimmy Liz Sullivan asked me this at Busboys and Poets about if this is a new genre called an intimate history. And I was like, gosh, I wish you had emailed me that in advance so I could have had something real clever to say in response. Because I was like, geez, that's a great question, right? Thinking about Audre Lorde's biomythography, right? The fact that Audre Lorde writes memoir that is still kind of this biography, history, myth, right? And that so many Black women, so many Black feminists before us in this genealogy we meaning other Black feminists are writing into, right? And hoping to situate ourselves within, we come from, right? That work. And I was like, gosh, I guess intimate history is a new thing now. I guess I made one, right? But I want to answer this question a little bit differently because I think it is a new genre, but I don't think it's quite that new, right? I think a lot about what Harriet Jacobs was writing in Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl, and that was a memoir, but it's absolutely history, right? When Ida is writing about lynchings, it's journalistic, right? It's reportage, but there's also memoir and narrative there, right? When she talks about her experiences with these three men who are lynched, who are her friends, who are her community members, right? There's absolutely narrative, there's personal narrative there. So I think, perhaps the answer is yes. Intimate history is a certain genre, but maybe it's just a certain genre within the larger body of Black feminist work in archival storytelling that so many of us are seeking to situate ourselves in, because this is how we archive this is how we tell stories, right? I have a deep respect for the written word. We're surrounded by it. But these genres are not ours, right? These genres, I think a lot of these categorizations are really, white supremacist in orientation. They're to make white people feel comfortable when they walk into a room so they know what they're gonna get, right? And I say this now after having written an academic book that wore me out. Whew, child. Wore me out. Why? Because the ways that it's almost as if it's not legible unless it follows a rubric, unless it follows a normative framework, right? I don't know what this is. You didn't define it. You don't know what democracy means, right? You don't know what I mean when I say black? You don't know what I mean when I say young, right? Like terms that should be very easy to understand, right? If it's not within these very finite, academically defined frameworks, it's illegible, right? And I think that's what I've come to understand more about writing a book about Black women, is that we are so illegible to people. So much so that they pick this up and it's like, what is it? Like, how do I engage, right? I'm just saying, like I said, y'all get the most intimate of these, right? And so I to answer Mecca's question, I think that so many Black women have written ourselves new genres in and through new genres because we don't need to be legible to the white world. And in fact, I'm not seeking to be legible to the white world. This is actually the first event on the entire book tour that I've done that wasn't explicitly a Black-owned location. So the last question I think I want to answer before I open up for questions from y'all is, what do I want people to take from this book? And the first thing is, I want people to take from it that Black women's existences are not new. We are not just been discovered in 2020. I know people think that is what happened. It's not what happened, right? We've been here all along. And not only have we been here, we have been actively archiving and writing our own stories and being present in our lives and in the lives of others in social movements, and also in the work of institutions, right? The frameworks of what we believe in today. Black women have been there the entire time. But also, I want folks to understand that it's not just the Harriet Tubmans and the Ida B. Wellses and the Zora Neale Hurstons who I say taught us in this book, right? I'm talking about the Auntie Barbaras and the Auntie Donna Fays who, you know, a lot of folks will never remember where they're from, right? And who they are, but they're worth remembering. Right? We do not have to only enter the archives when we enter in someone's vicious and horrible and nasty imaginations. It can be as simple as, I love your asymmetrical bob, and that's worth remembering, right? So from this book, I'm hoping that I'm able to convey that every Black woman, right, is teaching us by merely surviving this place that once is annihilated. That is a lesson in itself. So thank you. Questions? Questions?
Right there. She's behind you. Oh.
Unless y'all want me to keep talking.
Okay. Hi, my name's Ashley. And we actually came to the talk you did at Busboys and Poets earlier in the year. Yeah. And then I hadn't read the book. Yeah. Now I have, so I just wanted to come to this one to just thank you for writing this book, because I've read a lot of books on race and on gender, but I've never felt more seen than reading anything than reading when I was reading this book. So
thank you. See, yeah. Don't tell me what a good time. Thank you for coming to 2 more events than my mama. Thank you.
And my question, so I enjoyed the whole book, but one of the chapters that stood out to me, especially like given everything that's happening right now in the political climate, was about Shirley Chisholm and how she taught us like how to hold people accountable. And I was wondering, I, outside of voting, am not the most civically engaged person, but I was wondering if you had any advice or thoughts on how to really hold politicians in particular at every level accountable.
I love that question. Thank you for asking that question. Shirley Chisholm was interesting because she felt very strongly that we should absolutely engage institutions. She was very much an institutionalist, and that is one approach. Some folks are engaged in that. I'm not that type of person. I'm an organizer first, so I'm very much about find local organizations that are already in your community, that are already doing work. Do not set out and create new institutions, don't create new orgs. There are already people who have been doing the work who are embedded in your neighborhoods. You can find them very easily. And then also don't try and go recreate the wheel, right? So if they have initiatives and goals that they've been working on, don't be like, well, I'm here now and I'm gonna start from scratch. Don't do it, right? It's disrespectful, right, to the folks who have already been doing the work, but also usually when we come to new initiatives like abortion or education policy, and we're newer at it, there's just things we don't know that we don't know. So always look for local organizations, organizers who've been in the game. And this is not to say that they should be gatekeeping, they shouldn't, but it's to say that you should always take stock of the genealogy and who's been doing the work, who they are accountable to, and then get your start there. Uh-oh. I can hear you, but I don't think everybody else can.
Try again.
Hello.
There you go.
Hi, thank you so much for coming and reading and sharing this with us. I'm very excited to learn more and buy your book after this. I was wondering, I'm a writer and I also work in nonprofit space, but let's focus on the writing thing. How do you, when you were writing this book and working on this book, balance between your personal narrative and then all these other narratives and the people? I feel like when I write, I'm always very I think it seems very natural, but how do you find a way that you think you're able to tell the whole thing while still balancing all these different perspectives?
I love that question. Thank you for that. I'm going to be, again, honest, completely honest. I struggled with it because I actually didn't put much of myself in the the earlier drafts. There was not much of me at all. So much so that my editor was like, hey, do better. Because I was so reverent. I was in such a state of deference to these women that I was like, who am I to put myself in a conversation with them, which was actually antithetical from what I was setting out to do, right? So I had some people check me, which is always good. Have a community of people around you who will do that, right? So I think it depends on how you show up in the writing, how you show up in the work. At least for me, I had to, again, told you, process of grief. I had to grieve those versions of myself that was shrinking, that were trying to be small, and say, actually, if I'm going to tell this story, I have to also honor myself and have regard for myself. And I talk about that in the book. One of my best friends said that to me. She said, you keep talking about loving Black people, but what about you, Jen? That has to include you too, right? So I think it's a matter of making sure that you do honor and justice to yourself, but also honor and justice to the story and to the people that you are centering in the story. Yeah.
Hello.
Hi.
I'm Rashida, and thank you for talking about the love letter to your mother and also the grieving. And my question is, a part of that process or a part of that spectrum, where did forgiveness come in? Forgiveness for yourself or forgiveness for your mom or a combination thereof? Yeah,
thank you for that. What's interesting is I think because I'm a bleeding heart, there are people in the room who can attest to that. I'm a Virgo, but I'm a Pisces moon. So the forgiveness came in early. I was like, oh, I love you so much. I forgive you for everything you've done, right? But the problem with that is that I wasn't always very apt about the accountability part. Right? It was like, you're my mom. I'm supposed to forgive you. You're supposed to be in my life, right? So a lot of the grieving actually was the part of the getting rid of the supposed to say, oh no, you're also a person, and sometimes you're mean, and you do awful things, and you hurt my feelings, right? And it was people around me, my best friend, who's also in the book, because I love my friends, and my best friend was like, hey, I love Miss Cynthia, that's my mama. I love Miss Cynthia, but she mean to you, and I don't like that. And I was like, oh no, because my best friend was upset, because now I'm upset, right? Don't be upset, my best friend, right? And I was like, you know what, you're right. She's very mean, right? It was more of a matter of me sitting with the fact that I was holding on to the potential, to the supposed to, right? To what could be. I was like, I believe that you can do this, right? But you can't believe in somebody more than they believe in themselves. And you can't believe in someone beyond your capacity to care for your own body, right? and it was physically causing me pain and illness, right? So really, the forgiveness came, but the accountability is a different thing. And I had to really be accountable to myself, to my community who was watching me like, stop that, right? And also, I had to require that if somebody's gonna have access to me, they've got to be accountable to my boundaries. Yeah.
Hello again.
Hi.
I was wondering, because I know you're a professor, how have your students reacted to your book? Have any of
Child, they
them
don't read. Let me not be rude. Go ahead, finish your question. Go ahead.
Oh no, that was a question. Like, have they reacted to your book?
You know, so my undergrads don't read them. They ain't read the book. And I know they haven't because I taught Black feminist politics in spring, and I would say stuff in class like, who was Saartjie Baartman? And they'd be like, I'm like, y'all, it's in a book. It's in a book, right? So I know they didn't read it. But my graduate students read voraciously. And, you know, again, bleeding heart, Pisces. I love my students so much. I love my job. I'm so blessed to be able to say that. And I am lucky that most of the students who self-select to work with me are Black, brown, queer, disabled, trans, you know. So I get to help mentor folks like me. And I get to mentor them in ways that I wasn't mentored. So a lot of them have read the book and have similar ideas to what Ashley shared. They're like, I feel seen. I feel seen. And I have students who are getting their PhDs right now who are using this book in their own work, their own dissertations, who are like, you know, the fact that I can see you doing this as an academic means I can do it. And that, to be honest, is the most meaningful part of this journey, right? I didn't do this for the outside gaze. That means nothing to me. When I said it was a love letter, it was literally a love letter to all the people I care about. This is a very selfish project. Selfish and it's very Virgo. Selfish and selfless at the same time, right? Because you know how we are, right? But it was like, you know, I want to write the book that makes me feel deeply loved, but also conveys how much I love communities of Black, queer, brown, trans, disabled folk. And those are the folks who have come to me. Those are the students who have come to me and said, it's doing exactly that. And that's as far as I'm concerned, that's a success for me. Yeah.
First of all, I commend you for your line of work. And, you know, I think it's beautiful that you go over your own life over and over and over again. And that's like a very difficult task. Mm-hmm. And it's the opposite of what I do when I write. Like, I'm like, let me look at other people that aren't me and just make it up, because it's painful to look at my past and look at my life. So I wanted to ask you, how do you handle the repeated exposure of you, and how do you heal at the same time? Do you get numb? Like, is it a wound? What's it like for you?
Okay.
Sorry, I'm so curious.
Well, all right then. You know, I am committed to being the best version of myself every single day. It's very important to me. It's also really important to me to model the behaviors that I teach. Like, I got to a point where I was teaching like about Black feminism and about abolitionist principles and all, and I was like, I need to make sure I have complete alignment with everything I'm teaching in this class and everything I'm writing in this book. And I'm not gonna lie, it was hard. Like, I wrote this book, I got the book deal in 2019, and I wrote this primarily during COVID-19. And it was excruciating. There were times where I was literally writing and just sobbing, crying into my journal, crying into the keyboard, just like, and thank God for therapy. Tara is my therapist. She's a lovely white Jewish woman, you know what I'm saying? People are like, you got a white, listen. I love Tara. But, you know, I will say there were parts of your question, I want to answer all of them because I'm thorough. So you said, what is that like? And I will say it's extremely hard, right? Because there's a certain amount of exposure and you have to sit with yourself and be okay with it, right? So first I started writing stuff in here. I'm like, do I want everyone to know my business, right? But then there's a question of, am I moving in honesty? Am I moving in truth? And the truth is very healing. It's a very healing thing. When you get on the other side of, that's scary, it feels very good to be like, but I'm living completely in myself. I'm actually fully authentic. There's nothing, no one can shame me, right? Because I already told y'all. How you gonna shame me about something I told you? You can't, right? But the other part of this is like, you don't get numb, right? But people, I think, sometimes forget is that everything that we do as humans, right? It's like everything's a muscle. Everything is practiced. Everything is socialized. Everything that we do is logic and behavioral. So when we avoid our emotions, we avoid our past, it gets control over us, right? We don't learn how to engage with it. We don't learn how to hold it. We don't learn how to reintegrate with it, right? Trauma happens, and it's going to happen. A lot of it we have absolutely no control over. But what we do have control over is how we integrate it into our lives and who we become going forward. And when writing this book, I made a decision that I wasn't going to let the stuff that happened with my mother, my father, and growing up in Oakland or whatever change who I get to become anymore. I just decided. I was like, actually, I'm in charge of that. I'm the narrator, right? And that's what this book is. It's me narrating, right, my own story. And it's hard to do, to become the narrator when you haven't been, right? But I think that it gets easier the more you work at it. And so I can tell you now, after 7 months of being on this book tour and having these conversations, and literally on the way here, I was on the phone, I was like, my mama ain't came to none of my talks. And I was like, I'm gonna talk about that tonight, right? Like, that's how easy it gets. Right? Because I don't have any shame about it, because it's not mine to hold shame about. Because what did I do? Just be brilliant and tall, right? So I feel you, right? And I understand where that fear comes from, but I also want to encourage you to say, after you practice it some, that fear, right, is natural, but it doesn't control you anymore.
Thank you for passing it along, but also thank you for being here. I was wondering if, over the course of writing the book, if any of these narratives and sort of ancestors that you were calling upon, like, felt like if there were any of those that there was like a moment of like particularly joyful connection, like a story that like really like kind of brought you joy, or like, oh, like, like they're, maybe 100 years back in the past, but like, this could be one of the homies, or anything like that. So
I love that question, because actually I found a lot of joy in a lot actually of these stories. A lot of them brought me joy. So there's a couple. I think writing the Ida chapter was one of the first, because she was such a thug and she had beef with everybody. And I kind of thought it was funny that this is the 19th century, right? The 19th century. And she's like, I don't like y'all. And so I there's a lot of like reading of firsthand documentation and speeches and notes. And she is consistently giving people that smoke. Like, it's like, I will run you this fade. And she has no problem saying that to people in the most eloquent 19th century and verbiage. So Ida, I would say, is one of them. But I think also probably Bell Hooks writing that chapter, it was hard because she had just passed away. But in digging through her writings, she's also a Libra. Both my grandmothers were Libras. They kind of nasty. She was kind of a freak. And she was like, no, it's okay. She was very much like, I'm about to have a lover. I'm going to do this. Like, love was important to her, but so was sex. Like, she was like, y'all, we should be having orgasms. Like, and she was like always teetering on queer. And I was like, and I'm like reading, I found myself reading through her letters, like, who was this? Who was that? Like trying to figure out if I could find her gay lover, you know what I'm saying? And I think that, that's one of the really dope things about doing this work is that you find out that these women had really rich and beautiful lives and friendships. Like they all know one another. They love one another. They go on trips together. They sit and peel potatoes and carrots together and eat dinner together, And that's where I think the joy for me came was like reading about the letters they would hand write to each other. There's all these beautiful penmanship, like cursive, and they would write on anything. Belle would write on programs. She would write on church fans, like anything she found. She's like, oh, I was at this place today, so I wrote you a letter, and it's literally like a menu from a restaurant. You know what I'm saying? And it would be a beautiful letter. She would write in all the margins. You flip it over, turn it around, you read some more. That was the kind of stuff that I think was really beautiful to me, was that we so often reduce these women to their work or speeches here and there or like a quote, right? But these women had beautiful, deep, loving, sexual lives. They had rambunctious, rebellious, they had beef. You know what I'm saying? Like they was like run up, get done up, right? Like I love everything about that. And it was important for me to try and capture some of that with this book, to say they're not just the lectures that we love so much and the speeches that we love so much. They're also depthful, complicated human beings. Yeah. Thank you.
Hello.
Hi.
Thanks so much for sharing your story. I'm curious to hear from you if you could write a part 2, or, if there is a love letter that you wish you could have included in this story, and to who it would be to.
Yeah. So that was one of the hardest things about this book, was who to include and how to come up with that collection of folks. So in the book is Harriet Jacobs, Ida B. Wells, Zora Neale Hurston, Shirley Chisholm. I gotta go through all the names, y'all. Here, let's just go in order because I don't want to miss one. I've missed some before, and it made me very upset on the car ride home. Ella Baker, Fannie Lou Hamer, Toni Morrison, the Combahee River Collective, Audre Lorde, Angela Davis, and I actually added Bell Hooks. Originally, I had not included her, and she passed away while I was writing, and I had this kind of existential life crisis where I was like, "What is wrong with you?" You know what I'm saying? Not you, me. And so I write about that in the chapter on bell hooks, that I felt this deep grief that I had not included her. And then I was like, dang, there's so many people I haven't included, right? And so what I decided to do with this book is to really focus on the folks who taught me in those kind of early stages of my own journey, right? The very first chapter, I open up talking about when I walked into a Borders Books, back when they had Borders Books. And I picked up Sister Citizen by Melissa Harris Perry. And the first thing I picked up there in her book was a quote from Bell Hooks. And that was one of the first things I had ever written that was explicitly feminist. And I was in my 20s at that point. And I used her book, and I went down the list. I read Audre Lorde. I read all these different folks that I had never heard of before. And I had finished college. I had sat there in college and looked for a Black feminist text or class or anything, and there were none. They didn't teach them. There was no Black feminist on campus. So at this point, I was like desperate. So I went down her whole bibliography, and I found all these readings, and I used her bibliography as a syllabus. And that's who these women are. So this represents literally the order in which I discovered Black feminism. There's so much more after, right? Like, I've gotten really deep into Octavia Butler's work. I love Polly Murray. I love June Jordan. Like, there's so many people who I wasn't able to include, and they also came later in my journey, right? So I do have, in the last chapter, I asked my editor, and I was like, can I just add like a little syllabus at the end just so people can keep reading? And they was like, do whatever you want. So I made a list, like, here's some more feminists in case you haven't had enough feminism. Here's some more feminists, because I just feel like there's so many more that deserve to be in books like this, and I hope that people will see this and go, oh, we can write about just Black women for just because we love them, and I hope that people just keep doing it. I'm people, I will do that too, but I want other people to also do it. So I would probably say June Jordan, Octavia Butler, Polly Murray for sure, as a basis.
Last question. We can do one more.
You started talking about this a little bit, but about like when you started to discover like Black feminist literature after college, I think you said. Can you tell us more about that? Because I feel like there can be frustration around like, why haven't I learned about this before? Also, like intense validation of saying like, yes, somebody understands this. And so, yeah, I'd just love to hear more about that.
Yeah. So actually, the last chapter of the book is about that. It's called I Taught Myself Patience. And it's me writing about the ways that we are kind of in this urgency culture, right? Where, you know, you learn about a social movement or a political issue and you got to solve it right now. And I'm like, don't do that, right? Like, you read one book, stop, sit down, right? And that's kind of how I felt when I first discovered like Audre Lorde. I remember I would be like, oh my gosh, I read this book, and someone's like, you just not reading that? And I'm like, shut up. Yeah, I'm just not reading it. Like, it shouldn't matter when I come to it. It's just great that I found it, right? And I'm lucky in that my mother was a voracious fiction reader. So I read Alice Walker. I read a lot of Terry McMillan. I also read some trash like Danielle Steele. I love Danielle Steele, but it's not good. You know what I'm saying? But like, you know, I was exposed to the fiction side, but not the feminist, like, kind of narrative side. And I don't want anyone to make me feel shame about that, right? No one should feel shame about that. In actuality, what we should be doing is encouraging folks. If they encounter this work at 12 or 29 or 72, right? They encountered it, and that's beautiful. Especially in a culture that doesn't want us to think about, see, or believe in Black women's existence, period, right? So that last chapter is really me saying that give yourself time. Like, this might be the beginning of your journey, and that's okay too. This is a great starting point. And here's a way forward. Here are some readings. Here, check out the citations, because y'all know the citations is on lock, right? And see what else, see what speaks to you, right? Our journeys are our own, right? The way that I came to Black feminism was my specific journey, and no one's has to look like mine. And I don't think it should. But what came through and for me at the time, being a young genderqueer disabled person, like, that's what I needed. And I'm hoping that people will find what they need. So I think it's about releasing that shame that people put on you and embracing the fact that you get to decide what this looks like. It's up to you.
All righty. Thank you so much for coming to today's event. If we could have another round of applause for our author.